When It Ends With Us was preparing for release, everything pointed toward it becoming one of the biggest movies of the summer. Colleen Hoover's best-selling novel already had a massive fan base. Advance ticket sales were strong, and Blake Lively was coming off another huge year in Hollywood. On paper, the film had all the ingredients for a major success. The press tour should have been a celebration. Instead, it became one of the most talked about celebrity controversies of the year. Interestingly, the backlash didn't begin after audiences watched the movie. It started before many people had even stepped inside a theater. Critics, fans, and domestic violence advocates began questioning the way the film was being promoted. Rather than focusing on the difficult subject at the heart of the story, much of the marketing emphasized fashion, flowers, romance, and lifestyle content. That contrast quickly became one of the biggest talking points online.
If you're marketing a movie about domestic violence, having fan activations, having pop-ups, influencer marketing, sweepstakes, encouraging women to run around New York and find signed copies of the book, while it will probably get, more people in to see the movie, I think it does a major disservice to what the movie's end goal is trying to accomplish.
As more interviews were released, another difference became impossible to ignore. Blake Lively and Justin Baldoni seem to be describing two very different movies. During one interview, Blake explained that while domestic violence is part of the story, she viewed the film as something much broader, a story about a woman's life, her dreams, her relationships, and her personal growth.
This is a film that covers a lot of things, from first love to being an entrepreneur and opening your first shop and having all your dreams come true, to falling in love, to finding a new best friend, to domestic violence, which you don't hear all of those things in one place. But, this isn't a story, this isn't a love story, this isn't a love triangle, and this isn't a film about domestic violence. It's a film about a woman, because she's not defined by anything any man did to her.
Justin Baldoni, however, consistently approached the film from a different angle. Whenever he discussed It Ends With Us, he spoke extensively about domestic violence awareness, unhealthy relationships, and the importance of telling survivors' stories with care. He also explained that he partnered with experts from the very beginning to help ensure the film handled the subject responsibly.
I think that unhealthy relationships are on a spectrum, and this was a really important one. So, we partnered with our dear friends at Know More. It was the only way that I could direct this movie, is if I had a group of women specifically behind me who are specialists in this space. And from the very beginning, we worked very hard to create a very truthful and honest story that could reflect the reality of what millions and millions of people go through every day.
Neither perspective necessarily excluded the other. After all, a film can explore a woman's life while also addressing domestic violence. But because their interviews emphasized such different themes, many viewers began wondering whether the cast shared the same vision for what It Ends With Us was ultimately trying to say. That contrast quickly became one of the biggest stories surrounding the press tour. Instead of discussing scenes from the movie or the chemistry between its stars, audiences found themselves comparing interviews, looking for clues about why Blake and Justin seemed to be promoting the same film in completely different ways. At the time, very few people realized that this was only the beginning. Because as the press tour continued, the internet wasn't just comparing interviews anymore. It started turning those interviews into memes, and that's when the conversation exploded. As more interviews from the press tour were released, people weren't just watching them, they were comparing them. Side-by-side clips of Blake Lively and Justin Baldoni quickly spread across social media, with viewers pointing out how differently each of them talked about the film. One conversation focused heavily on Lily's personal journey and resilience, while the other repeatedly returned to the realities of domestic violence and the importance of supporting survivors. At first, these were simply observations, but before long, entertainment journalists began noticing the same contrast. Several publications questioned whether the marketing campaign had lost sight of the film's most serious subject matter. Critics argued that some promotional events felt much lighter than audiences expected for a story centered on abusive relationships. Rather than fading away, those discussions continued growing throughout the press tour. Then, another detail caught people's attention. While Justin continued speaking positively about Blake in interview after interview, many viewers noticed that Blake rarely mentioned Justin when discussing the film. That observation quickly became another topic of conversation online, especially as fans began compiling clips from different premieres and media appearances.
Is there something about Blake that we don't know, and what was it like working with her?
I don't know if you know how smart and creative she really is. I think she's best known as an actress, and of course she's, a fashion, icon, but she is so much more than that. She is a dynamic creative. She had her hands in every part of this production, and everything she touched, she made better.
That interview stood out because Justin wasn't simply praising Blake's performance on screen. He also spoke about her creative contributions behind the scenes, describing her as someone deeply involved throughout the production process. Around the same time, Blake continued describing why the project mattered to her, focusing on Lily as a complex character rather than defining the story through a single theme.
You don't often see a woman that gets to be so multifaceted because you don't often see messy women in film.
Neither approach was necessarily wrong, but together they reinforced the impression that audiences were hearing two very different messages about the same movie. Then, social media did what it often does. People started making jokes. Comedy creators began posting parody videos imagining what other famous movies would look like if they were promoted the same way. Those clips quickly went viral because they exaggerated something many viewers already felt: the disconnect between the emotional weight of the story and the upbeat tone of much of the promotional campaign.
No, I can't tell you. It's too embarrassing. Maybe if you call me on my Mint mobile phone one day, I'll tell you. Or if you take me out to a date to go see Deadpool x Wolverine in AMC movie theater.
He's making a list and checking it twice. Grab your red coats and come see my new movie, Schindler's List, starring a hunk with a very particular set of skills, Liam Neeson.
Ooh, grab your close friends and wear your cotton dress. Wear your thorn crown and Jesus.
The memes were everywhere, and while they were meant to be funny, they also reflected a growing criticism that had moved far beyond social media. By this point, major newspapers and entertainment websites were openly questioning whether the marketing campaign had struck the right balance. But despite all of that criticism, another moment from Blake's past was about to completely change the conversation. And unlike the interviews, this wasn't something recorded during the It Ends With Us press tour at all. Up to this point, most of the criticism surrounding It Ends With Us focused on the marketing campaign and the different ways Blake Lively and Justin Baldoni were presenting the movie. But then, something happened that completely changed the conversation. An older interview featuring Blake suddenly resurfaced online. The interview was with Norwegian entertainment reporter Kjersti Flaa and had originally been filmed years earlier while Blake was promoting another project. At the time, it received very little attention. But as people revisited Blake's public appearances during the It Ends With Us press tour, someone rediscovered the interview, and within days, millions of people had seen it. Viewers criticized what they felt was an awkward dynamic between Blake, her co-star Parker Posey, and the interviewer. Throughout much of the conversation, Blake and Parker spoke to each other instead of engaging directly with Kjersti, leaving many people feeling the interview had become uncomfortable to watch.
First of all, congrats on your little bump.
Congrats on your little bump.
What about my bump?
You've got two nice ones.
And they are kind of bumps, aren't they?
No, not bumps. The lovely lady lumps. Check it out.
Thank you. Thank you.
Did you guys love wearing those kind of clothes that you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And working in digital.
Everyone wants to talk about the clothes, but I wonder if they would ask the men about the clothes.
I would.
I love Jesse's suits and how
that's what I'm saying. His wardrobe was beautiful.
I know.
Corey's wardrobe was gorgeous. Those high-waisted pants.
The clip spread incredibly fast across YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, and X. Suddenly, people who hadn't been following the It Ends With Us press tour were now discussing Blake Lively because of an interview that had taken place years earlier. What made the situation even more significant was Kjersti Flaa's own reaction after the interview went viral. She explained that the experience had been one of the most difficult interviews of her career and shared why the renewed attention had brought those memories back into the spotlight.
And that interview just went completely downhill after that.
She was just being like so dismissive of me. She hated me, let's face it. She really hated me, and she didn't like that idea at all either. That was pretty obvious.
As the discussion continued, another interview from Kjersti's channel began circulating, but this time, the outcome was completely different. She shared a story about interviewing Anne Hathaway years earlier. Kjersti explained that the conversation hadn't gone well and that she left feeling disappointed. But unlike the Blake interview, this story had an unexpected ending. Months later, Anne Hathaway reached out to her personally.
And she did something pretty amazing. She sent me a long email explaining to me what she was going through right then when she did this interview. And she apologized for giving me an awful interview, basically. It was so touching to me.
That moment quickly became part of the larger conversation online. People weren't comparing Blake and Anne as individuals. Instead, many viewers pointed to the story as an example of how public criticism can sometimes be addressed directly. Anne's apology was widely praised because it showed a willingness to acknowledge an interaction that hadn't gone well, even years after it happened. By this point, the discussion surrounding It Ends With Us had expanded far beyond the movie itself. People were no longer just debating the marketing campaign or comparing interviews. Older clips, resurfaced moments, and public reactions had all become part of the story. Then, just as the backlash surrounding the press tour began to settle, another development changed everything once again. By the end of the summer, it seemed like the controversy surrounding the press tour had finally started to slow down. Despite the criticism, It Ends With Us was a massive commercial success at the box office, and Blake's new hair care brand had also launched successfully. From the outside, it looked like the conversation was beginning to fade. Then, just before Christmas, everything changed. On December 20th, 2024, Blake Lively filed a complaint with the California Civil Rights Department, making allegations related to her experience during the production of It Ends With Us. The following day, the New York Times published a lengthy article detailing those allegations and reporting on claims that Blake had been the target of a coordinated online smear campaign. Almost overnight, the story changed. The discussion was no longer centered on the press tour, the interviews, or the marketing campaign. Instead, attention shifted to the legal dispute and the serious allegations outlined in Blake's complaint. For many people, the timing raised new questions. Up until that point, much of the public criticism had focused on things audiences had seen for themselves: interviews, promotional events, and social media clips. Now, the conversation was centered on an entirely different claim. That much of the backlash had been intentionally amplified through a coordinated campaign. That became one of the biggest debates surrounding the case. According to Blake's complaint, negative public opinion didn't develop naturally. Instead, she alleged that efforts were made behind the scenes to damage her reputation online. Those allegations quickly became one of the central issues discussed in news coverage of the dispute. At the same time, Justin Baldoni's representative strongly denied the allegations. And what had started as a disagreement over a movie's press tour quickly evolved into one of Hollywood's most closely watched legal battles. As media coverage intensified, several organizations and industry figures reacted to the allegations. News outlets around the world covered the story, and the conversation surrounding It Ends With Us became much larger than the film itself. But even as those headlines dominated entertainment news, many people continued looking back at the events of the summer. They remembered the interviews. They remembered the marketing campaign. They remembered the viral clips. And that led to an important question. Were those reactions entirely the result of online influence, or were audiences responding to moments they had already watched and interpreted for themselves? That question would become one of the defining themes of the public debate as both sides continued presenting their versions of what happened. As the legal battle continued, another conversation emerged alongside it. People weren't just discussing the allegations, they were looking back at everything that had happened before the lawsuit was filed. The press tour, the interviews, the marketing campaign, the viral clips. For many viewers, those moments had shaped their opinions long before any legal documents became public. That became an important part of the discussion because people began asking themselves a simple question. Were they reacting to headlines, or were they reacting to interviews and public appearances they had already watched with their own eyes? Many felt their opinions had been formed during the summer, weeks before the legal dispute entered the picture. Others believed the full story hadn't been known until the legal filings became public. The result was two very different interpretations of the same timeline. As both sides continued presenting their arguments, Justin Baldoni's attorney, Brian Friedman, began responding publicly to the allegations. Rather than limiting his comments to written statements, he appeared in multiple interviews and pointed to text messages, emails, production documents, and video footage that he said supported Justin's version of events. Those responses added yet another chapter to a story that was already dominating entertainment headlines. Unlike the early weeks of the controversy, when much of the discussion centered on interviews and social media, the focus had now shifted toward evidence, court filings, and publicly released documents. As new material became available, people revisited earlier moments from the press tour to see whether they viewed them differently in light of everything that had happened since. Looking back now, it's remarkable how much the conversation evolved over such a short period of time. What began as criticism of a movie's promotional campaign eventually grew into one of Hollywood's biggest legal disputes. Along the way, nearly every interview, headline, and public appearance became part of a much larger timeline that people are still analyzing today. Whether someone believes the controversy began with the marketing, the resurfaced interviews, the legal filings, or everything combined, one thing is difficult to dispute. The press tour for It Ends With Us became far bigger than the movie itself. Instead of being remembered primarily for its box office success, it's now remembered as the beginning of one of the most talked about entertainment stories in recent years. And that's everything for today's breakdown. I'd love to hear what you think. Do you believe the public conversation surrounding It Ends With Us changed naturally over time? Or do you think one particular moment completely shifted the narrative? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss any future Hollywood updates. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.